From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Voters gave their verdicts Tuesday on nearly 150 statewide ballot measures and untold local initiatives covering a host of issues, including crime, rent control, voting, abortion, taxes, and school choice. Today, we'll take a look at some of the prominent results and what they might say about the political mood of the country this November 2024. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel, and editorial board member Mene Ukwe-Barua. Let's begin again in California, which a couple of weeks ago we called the golden state for direct democracy. Alicia, some conservative results, believe it or not, in these California initiatives. Let's start with the one on crime. What did the voters say, and what will the effects be in California?
So voters approved a Proposition 36, which was backed by a lot of the local district attorneys. And this would roll back actually parts of the Prop 47 that voters approved in 2014. Now, that initiative, if you recall, bankrolled essentially by George Soros, and it effectively decriminalized shoplifting and theft of less than $950 and drug possession. Now, as we've seen in the last decade or so, what has happened as a result of that is that, well, theft has spiked, especially shoplifting. You've had all these smash and grab burglaries, not just of big department stores, but also of mom and pop shops, small businesses. You've also seen increased homelessness, open air drug markets, and that is a direct result of Prop 47. So these local DAs sponsored this initiative that would roll back some parts. And when I say roll back, what it would effectively mean is that shoplifters who had 2 or more past theft convictions could be charged with felonies. It would also allow prosecutors to charge people who were found possessing illegal drugs. We're not even talking about marijuana here. We're really talking about like coke, fentanyl, and such, with a quote unquote treatment mandated felony. And that means that they would have the option to actually seek treatment and then get their charge dismissed. If not, they go to prison. So this would actually restore penalties as a crime deterrent and an inducement for rehab. What's amazing is that this initiative was approved in every single county of the state and by large margins. So right now it's on track to pass with 70% of the vote, which is among the highest vote share of any initiative in California history. Not only that, by way of comparison, another initiative on the ballot that would have enshrined same-sex marriage or the right to same-sex marriage in the Constitution passed with about 60% of the vote. So this has actually more widespread backing in California than same-sex marriage.
Similarly, do I see that the Los Angeles progressive prosecutor, the district attorney there, has also lost?
Right, George Gascon, and he was actually backed by George Soros, as you said. And a big reason for that is the crime backlash in LA. And that is because he essentially adopted a no cash bail policy. He also abandoned a lot of conservatives call broken windows policing, in that he stopped prosecuting quality of life offenses. And that could include trespassing, disturbing the peace, even resisting arrest, any kind of drug offenses. And as a result, you've seen increasing disorder. And this goes back to also what's been happening statewide is more robberies, burglaries. Even though these are quality of life offenses, they usually lead and result in other more egregious and even violent crimes, because a lot of the people who are not charged with these minor or supposedly non-violent crimes actually go on to commit more violent crimes, and including in some cases that have made news actually kill people. And so this has been a repudiation of Gascon's progressive law enforcement policies, similar to what happened with when Chelsea Bodine in San Francisco was ousted a couple of years ago.
A couple of economic ballot initiatives in California, one to raise the minimum wage to $18 an hour, and another to permit localities to increase rent control on housing units. And Alicia, both of those seem to have failed. Were the margins pretty close there, or were those wide as well? And do you suspect that this is a hope for California?
Well, the margin was quite large there, not quite as large as with Prop 36, but it passed overwhelmingly in basically every county statewide, including San Francisco, by the way. And what this initiative that had been backed by some progressive outfits would have done is allowed localities to impose rent control on any units. The state has already kind of has some restrictions on rent control, and this would have eliminated all of them. And so I think voters realize that what happens is when you cap rents, price controls, is that this results in shortages and invariably actually increases prices. And that's actually what you have seen in California as localities like San Francisco and LA have restricted rents on some of the older apartment buildings. Now, the minimum wage initiative would have raised the state's minimum to $18 an hour from $15. This also appears headed for defeat by a smaller margin, I think right now being rejected by about 52% of voters. And I think one of the things the opponents, which was primarily the business community, pointed to was the effects of the state's $20 an hour fast food minimum wage that Democrats enacted last year. And that has spurred job losses, actually reduced worker hours, and raised prices. And so Californians, I think, were actually learning the lessons from the policy mistakes in Sacramento.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. I'll say a couple words about a local measure in Santa Ana, California. It was Measure DD to permit non-citizen voting in local elections. It is against federal law and against state law in California for non-citizens to vote in those races. But there are a few cities in recent years, including San Francisco, Washington, D.C., an attempt in New York City to allow non-citizens to vote for mayor, for city council, school board, and so forth. And the argument is essentially that they may be paying taxes, they may be longtime residents with green cards, and they deserve a say in the way those schools and the local taxes are run. But a couple problems that I think come to mind here. One is there's just a practical one of having two sets of voter lists, two sets of ballots if you have non-citizens who can vote for some races and not for other races. And there's also a philosophical problem, I think, because if you accept that argument about why non-citizens should be able to vote for the city council in a town, why does that argument also not hold for voting for the governor of California, for example? And also notable that this Measure DD did not have any specific exclusion for people who are in the country illegally. And notable that I think some of the advocates of this hope that this would be a test case. They could get this going in Santa Ana. They could spread it to other towns in California, particularly a blue progressive state, maybe elsewhere across the country. So remarkable that that has gone down by a pretty resounding margin in Santa Ana as well. 62% no on that ballot measure to 38% yes. One final thought I would add is there are all sorts of concerns by people, including conspiracy theories about the voting process. We saw that after 2020, and it seems like a bad idea to open the door to more of that by having a line over here for citizens to vote and a line over there for non-citizens to vote. So I'm heartened by this result in Santa Ana. Kim, while we are on the subject of voting, a handful of states that were considering ranked choice voting ballot initiatives. What were the outcomes there?
Well, ranked choice voting, I think it's safe to say, went down in the country. And, this is this new form of voting. It's promoted by people who claim that it will reduce polarization. It was sort of snuck into Alaska 4 years ago as part of a very long and complex ballot initiative that most Alaskans did not understand what they were voting for. And what they have discovered essentially is it's complex, it's complicated, it's expensive, it takes a long time to get results, and it doesn't reduce polarization whatsoever. And that word seems to have gotten out across the country because what we saw with this election were many of the same millionaire billionaires that had got it on the ballot, out-of-state millionaire billionaires, I should note, got it on the ballot in Alaska, decided to now try to spread it to other states. And it was pretty resoundingly defeated in every ballot that it was on in the lower 48. Blue states, Oregon and Colorado said no. Purple states, Arizona and Nevada said no. Red states, Idaho and Montana said no. In places like Idaho, the vote against it was 70%. And, one state even went out of its way, Missouri, to proactively ban its use in the state with an initiative that actually did pass. So in a very short period of time, ranked choice has received a very poor reputation. And there was quite a bit of voter judgment on that. I also just think that maybe the folks who want to see this spread around the country chose a really bad time to launch this campaign. If you think about it, their campaign in Alaska was successful, but it was happening before all the counting mess that happened in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And I truly believe that a lot of the Americans that are rejecting some of these new novel voting experiments just feel as though we need to stop, take a breath, reevaluate the voting system we have now, and not go plunging into a bunch more of experimentation that delays results and makes voting more complicated.
Kim, you had also looked at a school choice referendum, I think in Nebraska. What was the story there?
Yeah, this to me was a huge disappointment, one of the disappointments of Tuesday, because what we've seen across this country for the past, 4 years, 5 years has been this flowering of school choice, where we now have states that have universal school choice. And there are just growing numbers of states that have some form or feature, whether it might be more charter schools or, scholarships or education savings accounts. So Nebraska had set up a very modest program to direct about $10 million in school scholarships. It was meant to enhance some private money that's been going in to enhance school choice in Nebraska. It was put up on an initiative to repeal that money, to essentially kill any state funding of school choice. And it passed in Nebraska. When you look at the polling and you talk to people afterward, it seems to have been this somewhat unholy alliance between teachers' unions, but also rural voters who are happy with their own public schools. They're worried about seeing any money diverted. In particular, they believe that school choice will largely benefit kids that live in cities, et cetera, and that maybe that will be to the detriment of public school funding in their areas. It's a little bit of a replication of what we've seen in places like Texas, where Greg Abbott's, a lot of the pushback initially to his school choice ideas were from rural Republicans who had the same idea. That has changed as voters got grumpier. They threw out some of those resistors in Texas to school choice just this last election. But Nebraska, it was narrow, but it went the other way. And the school choice proponents noted that they probably needed to work a little harder in getting their argument out on to people who ought to be natural proponents of more school choice.
Similar story, unfortunately, in Kentucky. That is a state with few school choice options and no charter schools, as I understand it. And the problem there is the state constitution has a line saying that education funding must go to no other purpose except common schools. And there's been a legal fight about what exactly that means, how broad it is, and whether it includes charter schools. And remember, charter schools are typically thought of as public schools. They get public funding. They have open enrollment. And if they get too many people that want to apply for the number of seats that they have, they end up doing lotteries. But they're run independently and they're run outside of the strictures of teachers' unions and contracts and the seniority and grievance rules that get negotiated in those contracts. And so this was a referendum to change the state constitution to say that the state may provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools. And according to the numbers as we have them right now, that failed almost 2-1, 65% saying no, 35% saying yes. And one of the difficulties is figuring out why, amid this flowering of school choice that Kim describes, why those ballot initiatives seem to have trouble passing. And one of the answers is that it's hard to amend a state constitution. It's hard to get a ballot measure passed. They're at the bottom of the ballot. They generally get less attention than certainly the presidential race, the Senate races, even some of the local races that really animate voters. And maybe part of it is also that there is a entrenched interest here, even if there is a small benefit that school choice could bring to a large number of students, there is a real coordination of opposition in the teachers' unions. So maybe that is part of the mystery. But my read of this is similar to Kim's, that just means these states are going to fall behind their competition. Greg Abbott primary challenged some of the Republicans in the state house that were blocking his school choice proposal there in Texas. Here's what he said the day after Election Day. Every candidate that I backed in the Texas House general election races won tonight. We even had Republican candidates win seats that had been held by Democrats. There are more than enough votes to pass school choice in Texas. So to my mind, that is going to be a draw and a boon for Texas, and maybe Kentucky will have to get its act together later.